Good morning, everybody. It is really fun to have you here. I'm excited to have everybody participating this morning, and we're looking forward to really a great series of sessions. We hope to really provide you with some education and maybe a little bit of inspiration along the way to help you achieve the theme of this process that you've signed up for, which is elevating your life by a conscious endeavor. That really comes from a quote from one of America's great writers and thinkers, Henry David Thoreau, in the 1850s. Elevation by a conscious endeavor suggests that we're empowered to do some things. When you think about the concept of those three words, elevation, consciousness, and an endeavor, what do you think about? When you think about elevating something in your life, what do you think about?
Bringing it up.
Bringing it up, improving it, right, in a general sense. So we're going to talk about that. We want to see if we can't increase the quality of our life really in every area, and we're going to do it on purpose. That's the consciousness part of what we're talking about here. The endeavor, that's really the hard part. That's where we're trying to sustain that effort over a period of time. So we're excited to do that. To help you remember the theme, I want to start with a little story to see if we can just embed that in your mind a little bit. So I'm going to tell you about a kind of a hero of mine. His name is Larry Walters. Back in 1984, Larry Walters is a 33-year-old truck driver living in the outskirts of Los Angeles, California. And we find Larry sitting out in his backyard in an old aluminum lawn chair, dreaming about flying. For as long as he could remember, he has dreamt about flying, really just rising up and having the ability to look around and enjoy that sense of flight. Money, the education, the opportunity to be a pilot really wasn't his. Hang gliding, he thought, was probably a little too dangerous, and any good place for hang gliding was too far away. So he did what he did best, sit out in that old aluminum lawn chair, you remember the kind with the webbing and the rivets, and would dream about flying until one particular day. And on this particular day, we get what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story. We find old Larry Walters flying at last and really getting up there. In fact, the rest of this story is actually covered by radio and television, because Larry is flying up over Los Angeles, California, still sitting in his lawn chair. But he's attached to it 45 helium-filled surplus weather balloons. And instead of just getting up 200-300 feet above his neighborhood, he's actually risen up 16,000 feet above Los Angeles. Went right through the approach corridor to the Los Angeles International Airport, where he was reported by a pilot, which would have been an interesting call, I imagine. Walters has a parachute on. He has a CB radio to communicate with his wife and his friends on the ground. He has a six-pack of his favorite beverage, and he has some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with him, and a BB gun to shoot some of the balloons when it's time to come down. He spends several hours in the air, and we finally get Larry down on the side of a mountain just outside of Los Angeles, California. And there's a lot of people interested, obviously. The police department's fascinated with the process and want to chat with him. But more importantly, the media is there to do an interview. Now, Larry Walters is a taciturn man. That means he doesn't speak much. So the interview wasn't filled with a lot of words. But when they approached him, they asked him, "Are you glad you did it?" He said, "Wonderfully so." "Would you do it again?" "Nope." "Were you scared?" Got a big grin on his face and said, "Oh, yes." But then they asked him the critical question. Why in the world did you do it? Why did you do this? And Larry's answer was really the key to what we're going to talk about today. He said, "You can't just sit there. You can't just sit there. You've got to make a decision." So what is our objective? My objective is to instill in each one of you a passion for personal and professional excellence. And I believe that professional excellence sustained over time is actually built on a foundation of personal excellence. So I want to instill in each one of you through this process a passion for personal and professional excellence. Second, a willingness to pursue a program of personal development. When you pursue a program or a system of personal development, that means you're going to sustain that over time. The result of that will be the third component of my objective, which is to instill in you the capacity to thrive in any environment that you choose. So if I can get you to discover the passion inside of you for excellence, if I can get you to adopt this program of personal development over time, we will actually be able to give you the ability to thrive. And thriving is not just getting by, it's not just day to day, but it's just sucking the marrow out of life, as Thoreau talked about. And that's really where we want to get to. That's what we want to do. So I'm going to suggest to you that we're going to use a quote from Henry James from some years back, the old author, that said, "It's time you start living the life you've imagined." It's time you start living the life you've imagined. Let me ask you three questions about that statement. The first one, do you think you're capable to start living? Because the suggestion is that you're going to take action. Tony Robbins talks about taking massive action. That's how you make change happen. That's how you achieve high quality things in your life. Taking action to start living over time. The second question is the first part of the quote. Is it time? Is it time right now for you to start living, to take that action? And the third question is an interesting one. Have you actually imagined another life? Is there something in your imagination, an elevated life quality that you don't have now that you would like to have? Well, that's what we want to find out about. Mark Twain talked about this subject quite a bit. He said this. He says, I can show anyone how to get what they want out of life. I just can't find anybody that can tell me what they want. Isn't that interesting? When you talk to the masses, you find out that they don't really know what they want. Maybe they haven't taken the time to imagine this other kind of life, this elevated life. Thoreau talked about this as well. I'm going to talk about Thoreau a little bit as we go through this process. You're going to hear his name a few times. Thoreau lived in the 1850s, and he was a student of the human condition. And again, what I think is one of our great American writers, authors, and thinkers. As he looked around him in the area around Concord, Massachusetts in 1850, here's what he saw. He saw second and third generation Americans working on farms, working in mills, working in the shops in town, working on the railroad. And he found that they were young men and women who had inherited those jobs and those responsibilities from their parents or their grandparents before them. Essentially, here were these young people stuck living out the dreams of their grandparents or their parents on the farm, in that mill, in that shop. Does that make some sense to you? As he looked at that and really made a judgment about life in particular, all around him, everywhere that he had gone, he said this. He said, the mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. The mass of men live lives of quiet desperation. If you look around you in your life, look at the people that you know. Do you know some people that are living lives of quiet desperation? Quietly desperate for something else, something new, something more? Are you one of those? So there's a tremendous story that illustrates this principle of capacity, and I want you to listen carefully to it because it's going to, I hope, inspire you with the idea that you are capable of more than you think you are. The story is really originates out of my living room. As I was passing through my living room one day, it was on a Saturday morning, happened to be passing through, the television was on, which seems to be a constant thing. And as I walked through the room, I was captivated by the image. It turns out that the program that was on the television that day was Wide World of Sports. If some of you remember Wide World of Sports, it was on years ago, the voice of Jim McKay talking about the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Had tremendous images of great sports successes and of course great sports disasters. Maybe the most famous one was the skier falling off the ski jump and tumbling down the mountain, unhurt, but it looked devastating. So the Wide World of Sports is on, and the image that captivates me is the Ironman triathlon in Hawaii. And as I was watching a man that was about my age in his mid-40s. And he was swimming during the swimming phase of the Ironman triathlon. And it really piqued my interest. Now, I don't know how you do things, but with me, whenever I see something interesting, I always have pen and paper somewhere around because I like to take notes and remember it. Sometimes it becomes useful in my life or useful in my teaching. It's useful somewhere. And I did that on this occasion, sat down and watched what was happening because they were focused on this one individual. His name was Richard Hoyt, about 47 years old. Again, during the swimming phase. Now, an Ironman triathlon consists of a 2.5-mile swim in the ocean. 2.5 miles. Don't know how many of you can swim across a swimming pool. 2.5 miles in the ocean is pretty tough. Secondly, you get out of the water, you get on your bike and ride 112 miles. 112 miles, beyond a century ride. You get off your bike and run a full marathon, 26.2 miles to the finish. 26 miles, 350 yards to the finish. So I was captivated by this. Again, seeing somebody about my age doing that. There was 1,500 people in the water during this Ironman. It was just the beginnings of when Ironman was coming into its own. And I watched with fascination as the father, as it expanded out, they were talking about both the father and his son, Ricky, who was just a teenager at the time. And it turns out they were doing the Ironman together, which inspires me a little bit. I have a son, and we kind of get a kick out of doing some things and competing a little bit. Well, I was fascinated by this father and son scenario as they participated together. They got out of the water together, got onto the bikes and rode 112 miles, got off that. And there's time limits set that if you don't arrive at the checkpoints, you're actually eliminated from the race. So they're hustling to make sure they get there to participate. They get off that bike and do the full marathon and finish the race. And it's exciting. It's exciting to see them do it as a companionship, as a unit. But what was really interesting about the story, and what captivated me when I first saw the image on television, were the ropes over the shoulders of Richard Hoyt, the father. It didn't make sense to me seeing him swimming through the ocean with ropes on his shoulders. But when the camera panned backwards, you could see the small rubber raft that his son Ricky was sitting in, who was born with cerebral palsy and has no control over his hands or his feet. He can't feed himself or speak at all. And yet here's this teenage boy sitting in this small rubber raft being pulled through the water 2.5 miles in the ocean by his father Richard. You can't be helped in the Ironman triathlon, so when they finished the race, last place obviously, but in time to proceed to the bike, he had to gather up Ricky on his own and hand carry him over to a special bike they had built. And then he seated Ricky in a seat that was on the handlebars and strapped him in. And then for the next 112 miles in the heat of Hawaii, he had to keep both himself and Ricky nourished with water and food so they could survive that middle part of that day. A brutal thing to ride 112 miles on your own, let alone carrying that weight. And then at the end of that bike ride, Richard Hoyt gathers up his son, Ricky, puts him in a special wheelchair and pushes him 26 miles, 350 yards to the finish of the Ironman triathlon. There was a day when they didn't believe the human body could complete an Ironman triathlon. They thought it was too much. In fact, they used to think that marathons were too much. The first guy that ran a marathon actually ran to the city of Marathon. Phidippides was an Olympic athlete and ran to the city of Marathon and actually died after reporting what he had to report to the king. So most people believed it was too much. But here we are now with a full Ironman triathlon. And not only can you complete one, but you can do it carrying your teenage son all the way through. Your capacity is absolutely unlimited. You can achieve anything you want to do. So here's the challenge. Attach some balloons to the chair you're sitting in. Attach some balloons to the dreams that you have and give them flight. Elevate your life by a conscious endeavor. Very simply put, it's time you start living the life you've imagined. Thank you.